inquest into the murder of a Victorian man by the Khmer Rouge has resumed after stalling for more than a decade.
Imagine a country where in just 4 years, nearly a quarter of the population vanished, not through war with an outside enemy, but by the hands of its own leaders. Between 1975 and 1979, Cambodia, under the rule of the Khmer Rouge, became a nightmarish experiment in radical ideology, costing the lives of 1.5 to 2 million people, about 25% of its population. This wasn't a random outburst of chaos, it was a calculated genocide driven by a vision of a perfect society. So how did Cambodia spiral into such horror? Let's dive into the history, the ideology, and the global forces that fueled this tragedy. Historical context: Cambodia before the storm. To grasp why Cambodia turned on itself, we need to rewind the clock. For nearly a century, Cambodia was a French colony, part of French Indochina, until it gained independence in 1953 under King Norodom Sihanouk. He ruled a fragile nation caught in the crosshairs of the Cold War, trying to stay neutral as tensions brewed around him. But neutrality couldn't shield Cambodia from the Vietnam War next door. By the late 1960s, the U.S., desperate to stop the spread of communism, began secretly bombing eastern Cambodia to hit Viet Cong bases. From 1969 to 1973, an estimated 500,000 tons of bombs rained down, killing tens of thousands of civilians and displacing countless more. Villages were obliterated, farmland ruined, and resentment grew. Sihanouk's juggling act failed in 1970 when a U.S.-backed coup replaced him with General Lon Nol, whose corrupt and shaky government only deepened the chaos. Enter the Khmer Rouge. This communist guerrilla group, led by Pol Pot, saw their chance in the unrest. They promised the rural poor, who'd borne the brunt of the bombings and Lon Nol's failures, a better life free of corruption and foreign meddling. The bombings and coup had created a perfect storm, a destabilized nation ripe for revolution. After years of civil war, the Khmer Rouge marched into Phnom Penh on April 17, 1975, cheered by a weary population hoping for peace. What they got instead was terror. The rise of the Khmer Rouge, path to power. The Khmer Rouge didn't just stumble into power, they were propelled by a mix of charisma, strategy, and outside help. Pol Pot, born Saloth Sar, had studied in France where he soaked up Marxist ideas and radicalized his worldview. Back in Cambodia, he rose through the communist ranks, molding the Khmer Rouge into a force inspired by Maoist China's peasant revolutions. Their message resonated with rural Cambodians, farmers and villagers fed up with Lon Nol's corruption and the destruction from U.S. bombs. The Khmer Rouge painted themselves as saviors, vowing to erase inequality and foreign influence. They built their army in the countryside, waging a brutal civil war against Lon Nol's forces. China was their biggest cheerleader, supplying weapons, training, and cash to counter Soviet-backed Vietnam. This Cold War proxy game gave the Khmer Rouge the muscle they needed. By April 1975, after 5 years of fighting, they toppled Lon Nol and seized the capital. The people of Phnom Penh waved white flags expecting relief. Instead, the Khmer Rouge had other plans that would turn Cambodia into a killing machine. Ideological foundations, a vision of utopia. What drove the Khmer Rouge to kill 25% of their own people? It wasn't madness, it was a warped dream of paradise. They called it Year Zero, a reset button to wipe out history and build a classless, agrarian society from scratch. Think Mao's Cultural Revolution on steroids, mixed with a dose of Khmer nationalism and a hatred of anything modern or foreign. Pol Pot and his inner circle romanticized Cambodia's ancient Angkor Empire, imagining a golden age of self-sufficient farmers. Cities, to them, were dens of corruption and Western decadence. Intellectuals, teachers, doctors, even people wearing glasses were threats to their vision. Ethnic minorities like the Vietnamese and Cham Muslims, enemies to be erased. Religion, a relic to be crushed. Monks were slaughtered, temples trashed. This wasn't just ideology, it was obsession. The Khmer Rouge believed that by purging society of impurities and forcing everyone into the fields, they could leap into a utopian future. But turning a nation of 7 million into a giant peasant commune meant breaking everything and everyone in their path. Policies of horror, implementing the nightmare. The Khmer Rouge didn't waste time. Days after taking Phnom Penh, they ordered everyone out. Over 2 million city dwellers, men, women, kids, the elderly, were marched into the countryside at gunpoint. No explanations, no exceptions. Thousands died on these forced treks from exhaustion or starvation, or were shot if they stumbled. In the rural labor camps, life became a living hell. People worked 12 to 18 hours a day planting rice, digging canals, and building dams, often with no tools but their hands. The regime set insane quotas, like tripling rice production, but with no expertise or resources, it was a fantasy. Food was rationed to a few spoonfuls a day. Starvation and disease killed countless more. Money gone, schools and hospitals closed, families split apart. Kids were sent to work or brainwashed to spy on their parents. The Khmer Rouge saw loyalty to the state as the only bond that mattered, and if you didn't fit their mold, you were expendable. Then came the purges. Paranoia consumed the leadership. Anyone could be a traitor. At S-21, a former school-turned-torture chamber, thousands were chained, beaten, and forced to confess to imaginary crimes. Then they were executed, often with clubs or plastic bags to save bullets. Babies were smashed against trees to stop future revenge. The killing fields sprouted nationwide, mass graves where bodies piled up. By 1979, an estimated 1.5 to 2 million were dead. Some were shot or hacked apart, most died from hunger, sickness, or sheer exhaustion. This was no accident. It was the Khmer Rouge's blueprint in action. The world's role: allies and enablers. While Cambodia bled, the world mostly watched, or worse, helped. The Khmer Rouge kept the country sealed off, expelling foreigners and hiding the slaughter, but some nations weren't just bystanders, they were enablers. China was the regime's lifeline, pumping in aid and advisors. To Beijing, the Khmer Rouge were a pawn against Vietnam and the Soviets in the Cold War chess game. Then there's the twist. After Vietnam invaded in 1979 and stopped the genocide, the U.S. and Western countries backed the ousted Khmer Rouge. Why? Cold War politics. Vietnam's Soviet ties made it the bigger enemy, so the West propped up Pol Pot's exiled government at the UN into the 1990s, even sending aid to his fighters. It's a grim irony. Nations preaching human rights indirectly fueled a genocidal regime's afterlife. The silence and cynicism of the global stage didn't cause the genocide, but they let it fester longer than it might have. Aftermath and legacy, scars that remain. In January 1979, Vietnam invaded, driving the Khmer Rouge out of power and into the jungles near Thailand. The killing stopped, but Cambodia was a wreck. Its people starved, its cities empty, its educated class decimated, until Pol Pot's death in 1998, a shadow of their former terror. Recovery has been agonizing. The Vietnamese stayed until 1989, installing a new government but leaving behind a traumatized nation. Survivors carried physical scars, lost limbs, malnutrition, and mental ones haunted by what they'd seen. Over half of today's Cambodians were born after 1979, but the past still echoes in their lives. Justice? It's been patchy. The extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia, set up in 2006, convicted a handful of leaders like Brother Number 2 Nuon Chea, but Pol Pot died free in 1998. The killing fields in S-21 are now memorials, drawing visitors to face the horror head-on. Cambodia's rebuilding, but the wounds, personal, cultural, societal, run deep. Conclusion: the Cambodian genocide wasn't a sudden frenzy. It was a deadly cocktail of historical upheaval, a fanatical ideology, and a world that either aided or ignored it. The Khmer Rouge's quest for utopia left 25% of their people dead and a nation shattered. Today, Cambodia's story warns us how fast civilization can crumble when power, paranoia, and indifference collide. Those killing fields aren't just graves, they're a call to never forget.